Hey guys, it's Baban, and in this video I'm going to be doing a sample critique on some of my old art. This is a sample of a critique that you will get on my Patreon critique/commission tier, so every month you either get a small commission or a 20-minute critique like this one. I have a loose wash layer just to put over the top of this so I can draw on it. Now the first thing that I notice is there's quite a lot of perspective going on here. I know that when I did this I used a grid to make sure that the perspective was radiating outwards and correct. So I know that that fits into a grid. I can lay that out and all these lines would make sense. But you can see once I get to drawing the humans, it's a little bit off. So we have the volume of the front of the face here as kind of a single plane, but that plane isn't really carried through to the back. We just have the face sort of as a flat plane that is warped and then drawn onto. So it looks a bit awkward, and I would recommend that I take the same perspective lines and use those to block out the head, so we would have the rest of the skull come a bit further back, like so, and everything wouldn't look so flat as it is. You can kind of see it on the rest of them. I did a bit better here. There is a bit more volume going back. You could probably block out the side of the face along here. It disappears a little bit on the rounder characters, but I would expect that. They do have a bit more volume to them, but it is mainly over here is the worst culprit. You can you can really see where there is no volume going on this plane, on this side of the face. And I think if I were to follow that through, that perspective correctly, they would be at a lot more extreme of an angle than I have drawn them at here. Another perspective issue I see, and this could be a stylization thing with the rounder faces and not doing the chins, but this cat's face looks a little bit too stretched here, so maybe adding a chin in to define that and not just having it be one stretched out shape all the way down like this would be better, and that is something that is becoming a problem because of that wacky perspective and trying to fit it into that. The cat does fit into it a little bit better. You can see if I draw out vague lines like this to indicate that it fits in a bit better, but also I think the both of them might have an issue with size in relation to everyone else. What I'm going to do is set out a ruler and block out where these perspective lines actually are so that I can follow on exactly from them and apply that to the cats. So I've got my ruler down and I'm going to maneuver that around until I get it to line up with these angles that I know it should fit with. So it should fit to that angle and these angles over here. So that's lining up about enough. So I know that's where those perspective lines are going to be. Like I say, I know that that background fits to these, but the characters are maybe a little bit off within that grid. So if I draw the floor plane where this cat is, so we can see where that intersection is, and the cat's foot hits the ground. If I pull that back and we go to, let's mark down where the cat is, and then we'll also mark down where these feet are hitting the ground, so like here. And we do have a bit of a curve going on, so these kind of warp around there. So what I want to look at is how tall is this cat in the foreground here? We have this height for the head, and then how tall would that make the cat in relation to everyone else? So if I pull this back, the cat is around that tall compared to everyone else. Of course, if I pulled it around, we'd have more of that curve that you can see present here. So maybe this tall. Maybe about knee height. Is that correct? Is that a little bit too small or too tall? Is that the size I'm going for? It definitely looks slightly off, so that is something I would probably rework more exactly within this frame by calculating it like that. So using that perspective grid that is set up to help with the proportions and how they sit in space. For the composition, I don't think it's too interesting, but there are certain compositional elements that I think do work well. So the crescent moon here looks particularly nice, and there's this extra empty little space that houses that side point of it there, which I think looks quite good. And you also have the space for it to curve around here, and we got a little bit of an intersection in there again. So there are some nice pieces of negative space in here between where arms bend and the bodies that allow that shape to come through fully without too much of it getting cut off. And that's a really nice way of framing the characters here specifically. It almost follows on, but not in a strange, awkward tangent way, around with the curve of the face here. This is also very centered, so there's a lot of lines that come inwards like this. They all basically point towards the characters because it's all very centered. You can clearly see where that perspective is going and that it's used to frame the characters like that. Everything is very symmetrical, and that is very on purpose, and it works for what it's doing. Compositionally, I can also see that there are a lot of lead-in lines to make sure that the way you are looking around the image is very controlled. So we have the curve of the cattail on this side and this side. As we look up that way, you have the ribbons to grab onto. There's a lot of closed loops with the way that the arms move. We've got this arm pointing to the face, this arm up and around that leads into this arm over here and then downwards. We also have it with the point of the finger that swings up that way. So everything is very directed towards something. All the lines are very intentional. You have the swirl of the hair down this way even, like so. The foot pulls over this way. So you can see a lot of me using those motion lines, and I think I actually did quite well on this one. Also with the way that I have the feet all separated and everyone's split in layers, but there's a lot of kind of symmetrical crisscrossing. So we have this kind of crisscross with the lines here and with the legs like here and here. There's lots of that going on, and it just helps to break up the, you know, forest, I guess, of tree trunks. With the designs and the shoes, I tried to vary them for each character, so it wasn't just a repeat of the same outfit, to make them a bit more unique and interesting to draw and to change the shapes a bit. I do think I exaggerated some spots too much, so the anatomy's a little bit funny in some spaces, like this part of the body here doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. There's not really enough chunk that should be there. I would maybe calm that down a bit and work on the muscles around there. I did try to make her a little bit more beefy and exaggerate that shape more, but that might also be too much. So those muscles around the shoulder blade and the latissimus swinging around is something I would advise work on. After looking at this, you could also see it a little bit here where it's not really shaded out, even though they have clothes on. The form around here isn't shaded out very well. We've also got a bit of awkward shading in the way that this arm is brought up, so it looks like it's bent at a very unnatural angle. That also works in with the way that these creases in the fabric are distorting the form strangely, so I would maybe try and fix it very quickly like this. My intention with the lighting here was to make it very much like it's coming from where we're looking, so it's a low down light that is going upwards and radiating out from this spot. So you can see that in how the other characters have it more towards the center, hitting the light on them. But I tried to keep it simpler so that the faces were mostly lit up and the shadow wasn't 100% correct, but there's definitely spots here where that is just something that needs to be fixed, so I could probably shade the top around here a little bit. I maybe wouldn't do it on the face, maybe a little bit on top of the nose or something to make that form more obvious, and to definitely fix this arm and make sure that that is lit up so that it comes more forward. This is also an issue with wrapping the fabric around the form here, so it isn't, it kind of looks like it's going backwards like this, when it shouldn't. That's a very unnatural angle and looks very strange. So a lot of these curves would need to be changed to reflect that angle so that it was more like this and come in outwards and then back. And as a very quick example, you can see immediately how it goes from sort of a loose blob that looks broken in some of the angles to having a form that makes more sense there. So this would lead me to suggest looking more at wrapping things around the form, maybe blocking these out as tubes, like a cartoon, kind of spaghetti limbs first, to make sure that the forms I'm defining are going in the right direction and don't look like they are bent in an unnatural way. This could also be applied to the rest of them probably, so I could put more shading around the faces. I think I did enough variation in the faces, but what is holding it back is that volume that I mentioned and shading the forms correctly to convey that. Overall, I think the designs are okay. They have a little bit more variation in them. They reflect the character a bit more. Some of them are kind of boring. This one isn't great. I don't think this one's great. Taking the gloves away is taking a very integral part of the design away, and I don't think that's ideal. I would maybe add the gloves back on here and just have them be small or something like that. It's too much to take away from the design. I like this one. This is a bit more of a different take compared to the other ones. And also maybe this one with the, I was trying to go for a boxing skirt on that one. I think that is much more of a variation than the others, and they read a lot better also. With the shoes, I think there is interesting variation in those, bringing the different symbols into them. They are just maybe not defined enough. I could have maybe done that with different colors, so you can see I've got the Mars symbol there, and all the other ones incorporated into the designs. I will say I think there's probably better ways that I could have done that other than just the lines. That does look a bit weak, especially on these. What I'm noticing with the anatomy too is that the heels are very weak on these. So there's almost like a spaghetti limb kind of look where you don't see the heels, or it looks like I'm not confident enough to draw the heels here, so they are simplifying into these very wormy shapes like this. This whole heel area here does not seem to be getting much definition. That would be something else I would suggest working on, so figuring out a way to maintain that curve, because I don't think the curves are a bad idea. I think they look very dainty and floaty and bouncy, which very much fits with the theme, but to just bring a little bit more of the structure in to try and correct that on top of the looser shapes that are already there, and that should help to improve it immediately. There are some where you can see a bit of the heel, but again, this is like a very, very soft, loose shape where there is clearly not very much confidence in the anatomy there to be able to convey the shape well. And I don't think there's enough consistency with the stylization here that noodly shape is making sense. There's a little bit too much detail in the hair and the faces and the way that they are drawn that those noodle feet don't really carry. They just look like a mistake, or there is some area of knowledge that is missing there, which is the heels. So if I was to add those in straight away, they start to look like they make more sense and are brought into line with the amount of detail that is in the rest of the way that they are drawn. And I think that's why, if I take this off for a second, you can see that these boots are the ones that read the best. These ones here, because they have more of a defined heel, you can kind of explain away why they are a little bit more baggy there. They're supposed to be sort of tapered in that way, so you get skinny and then wider at the bottom to stylize the shape. But on top of that, you have this more defined heel that sticks out like that just as part of the shoe design, but it's that underlying form underneath that is the issue, and that is part of a design that is covering it well. There is a similar issue to what I pointed out with the arm and the shoulder over here on this shoulder as well. So it maybe looks like it's coming a bit too far forward. I think there are issues in general with the joints. You can see around this wrist, there's also a bit of a problem. So any of these areas that are where the joints sit and are more bony. The bones are closer to the surface and you can see more of the skeletal structure, or that's informing the shape that I'm drawing. Seems to be where everything starts to get a little bit looser, and I'm hoping that the style will carry it, it looks like, in this. So that would be the next thing also that I would suggest on these, is to work on where you have the joints, so the knees and the heels and the ankles and the shoulders and elbows and wrists. And I can tell that this is something that is weaker and needs to be improved on, because there is a try at getting those details in the knee down, so you can see the lines and the tiny bits of shading, but again, it's not quite defining the form right, but I can see the intent there. So that is definitely the next move for studying. With the colours here, I don't think they're that bad. There is something really nice about this. If I eyedrop it, it's leaning in towards a mid-yellow, but slightly more towards a green, so it's kind of a bright acid yellow, but that and then the green coming off it into that blue is a very nice gradient, and I think it really makes everything pop because it is so saturated, and because of the compositional technique with the shape that's used on it, it works really nicely together to center everything and to frame the characters. With the rest of the colours, I can see little bits of attention to detail, so the whites are shaded with colours that lean slightly into the other colours. So this is slightly purple, this one's slightly purplish blue, this one is more grey, this one leans a bit more blue, and that one leans a bit more blue. So there is very specific colour choices on these, even though it's cell shaded. Some of these colours do have an issue with turning muddy, but overall, in general, I think they are quite well controlled without turning into dirty looking colours, if that makes sense. So you've got a nice warm orange in here shading the yellow, you've got a purple shading this brown here, so it's not turning into something muddy. But over here with the blonde, there is a little bit of an issue with it looking kind of yucky. So the colour that it is when I eyedrop it is sort of a very dull red. It's similar to these colours in the building, and that yellow light on it is making it look kind of brown. What I would suggest on that is maybe trying to swing slightly into a green, just very slightly into a green, because that will help with the blondie undertones, or a little bit more towards the green end of yellowish. So something like this, and it doesn't look quite so green as I'm putting it down, because of the relative color with everything. Everything else is a little bit warmer, so it's not really showing it as such a green color. But that is what is in there, so maybe bringing it closer towards that than into those muddy browns would help to make that color pop. And you can see as I'm slapping it on, that's really helping it already. And you could even swing more into those greens with the darker colors, sort of khaki colors I like to lean into with the blonde, and it helps make that color pop a whole lot. You can see that that plays in really well with the orange that is here too, because there's the complementary colors of the green and the orange against each other, or almost complementary, because we have this very red color here. If I drop that one that is shading that skirt, and you can see if I turn that layer off again, immediately we go from something that's more muddy and kind of a dirty blonde into the sort of blonde that I know I was trying to aim for, where it's got more of that warmth in it and not so much the dullness. I think the variations in the darker colours are nice, so we have purple here and we have dark blue here, and those work together nicely. You also see that in the way that those highlights are coming out. There isn't too much atmospheric color that is affecting them, so you've got all those yellow lights in the background that is applying to everything else. There's a little bit of a wash behind them, you can see. In the distance, everything sort of fades out into that street light color. I wanted to make sure that they had colors that popped out, so I think that works a lot better on them actually. Instead of trying to make them seem like they're set more into the environment, they've got more of a white light on them. I would say that maybe this piece in the front here is still a bit too yellow, so shifting that into something that is closer to the lighting that I'm trying to get on them may help. So maybe exaggerate it just into a white light and desaturate that colour slightly so that it reads more clearly as a different light to what is light in the background. So just to patch it really quickly, something like this, and desaturate it. But overall, I think the colours in this are quite nicely done because we have that clear differentiation between the background and the foreground where they are, and also this little intermediary of, you know, the edge of the building that could maybe be done in a bit more detail or something a bit more specific with it, because it seems a bit low, or a little bit too high even, or a little bit too kind of spindly. But that being in shadow and then having them in very high contrast is a very nice indicator of the layers that we have, and it also helps separate it from the background. But because this is just a nice presentation piece to show off the characters, I think not leaning into those environmental colours and worrying too much about kind of colour relativity and getting like the blue from the sky in there and the yellow from those lights in the back, just kind of presenting them nicely, making sure they stand out from the background. I think those colours are chosen quite well from that. You don't want to make them too crazy in that situation. And there we go. Thanks for watching. I hope this helped. If it did, give us a like, share if you think it will help someone else, and you can get critiques like this on my critique/commission tier on the Patreon. You get either a 20-minute critique every month or a small commission sketch. You can find all my links, including the Patreon one and my commission information, down in the description. Yeah, thanks for watching. Goodbye!